Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SHP webinar, How to Protect All Staff in a World of Hybrid Working, which today is sponsored by PeopleSafe and broadcast by Informa. I'm Mark Glover. I'm the fairly new editor at the Safety and Health Practitioner SHP, and I'll be moderating today what is my first webinar for the publication. So I'm looking forward to it, and it's a really good topic as well to get stuck into straight away. But before we all kick off, I've just got a few bits of housekeeping and some announcements just to help you guys through the sort of logistics, if you like, of the event. So ultimately, we want this webinar to be interactive with you all. There's a dock of widgets actually across the bottom of the screen, which will allow you to learn about today's speakers. You can download some resources as well. If you want to, you can share the webinar on your social media platforms. We've got a Q&A option as well, which I'll come on to in a bit. And then there's also, importantly, you'll be able to download your attendant certificate also. In terms of the presentations and the slides, they're going to move on automatically by themselves. And you'll also be sent a link after the presentation, so you'll be able to view on demand whenever it's good for you if you want to go back. And just regarding that attendant certificate, that'll be available for you to download within the next 24 hours. Finally, just for us at Informa, there'll be a feedback form at the end of the event. It would be great if you could find some time just to let us know what you might like to do in the future. If there's anything that didn't work quite right, it really helps us going forward with our events such as this. Last thing, if there are any technical problems, you'll see there's a chat box, Q&A chat box at the bottom. If you can type in there if you're having any issues. We've got a team behind the scenes, so hopefully somebody from there will be able to help you with any issues that you're having. So that's the admin. Now on to the presentation. So as I said, it's entitled How to Protect All Staff in a World of Hybrid Working. And I think sort of post-COVID, society has shifted in many ways, but the world of work has really has seen one of the biggest shifts, and that is this particular pivot to hybrid working. It's a challenge. It's thrown up many issues for employers and employees. And it's this new dynamic, working at home, working in the office, working in transit, in between, commuting, traveling. Hopefully now, I guess, with COVID behind us, we can sort of start to look at it now. It's time now to really sort of ask questions about it and what we're going to do. It's a big question, but we're hopefully in this event here, we're going to debate it and discuss around it. And to do that, we've got some really excellent panelists on board. First of all, we've got Naz Dossa, who is the CEO of PeopleSafe. He's also chair of the BSIA, the British Security Industry Association's Lone Worker Section Committee. We've also got Violet Alvarez from the brilliant Susie Lamplugh Trust. Violet is a policy officer at the Trust, so it's really good to have Violet with us. And also Nicole Vasquez is joining us from Worthwhile Training. So it's a really great array of speakers so we can get with their presentations, and it's going to be a really good overview, I think. But just before we kick off, I wanted to get a bit of a temperature check of what you guys, the audience, what's going on now with you? What's 2 years later after the pandemic? How's things settling down or not for you? And we had this poll just set up, which really, if you can, choose one of the options. So the question is, what has been the biggest impact of hybrid working on your safety, security, and well-being? Is it new safety procedures? Is it new security processes? New technology, of course, which is having more of a role now? Is it updated management check-in protocols? Or have you found no impact at all? If you can click on the screen and pop down what you think is most suited to you, and we can see what the results bring. Right, that's really That's really interesting. New technology. That is interesting, and probably I can see Nars nodding there as well, which is probably quite timely to bring him now in for the presentation. But we'll come back to this. We'll come back to the that poll if we have time later on, just to drill down into it a little bit more. But yeah, as I say, we've got Nars online now. Just to intro Nars again, he's the CEO at PeopleSafe, so there is an element of technology obviously that's coming in there, and he's also the chair of the British Security Industry Association's Lone Worker Section Committee. Nars, thanks for coming on, and I'll pass the baton over to you.
Great stuff. Thank you, Mark, and thanks for the introduction and interesting poll that we will get to. As you rightly said at the beginning, the world of work has changed completely following the pandemic. Running a business myself, we've seen what those changes have meant and how we've had to adapt and how businesses have to change how they work. And it's not only about employees, it's also about the employers. And there's a number of challenges that presents. So we took on a task to undertake a survey, and we surveyed a sample of over 2,000 individual employees, but also over 1,000 businesses across a number of sectors. And we discovered some intriguing trends around personal safety that we believe have an impact on people, employees, not only the way they work, but also about their well-being. And what I'm going to do during this presentation is share some of the key results about how it affects hybrid workers, and also a case study of how one company is approaching and dealing with that. So the first thing to look at is that the biggest takeaway, is that there's a large number of people thinking about their safety every week. And if we extrapolate the results that we found and take that to the working population, that's as high as 6.8 million people, or 21% of employees. So if you just pause to think about that, and you have people working for you in a team, that's a big number. And we know that that's not something that's limited to the workplace. They're often concerned about how they're getting to and from work and what happens there. And people work unsociable hours. One of the studies that we found, 58% have experienced a negative event that made them feel unsafe at work or on their commute. And again, that's a huge number. And this shows that there is not just a change in working behaviors, but about how people really feel about their safety. So, as you can see here at the top, the graph on the right, every sector is reporting a concern for their safety. Some of these reflect frontline workers where you'd expect, and specifically on the left in hospitality and retail, that's something we really would expect to see. They're seeing increased aggression from frustrated and angry customers, but that's not alone. Then you go along the graph, and it's logistics, production, manual trades, all report high levels of feeling unsafe. What also stands out are the workers, the category of worker feeling the most unsafe. The reasons for this vary on traveling and commuting, working from varied locations, and not having a safe space at home. And this could be for a number of reasons. And I think one of the questions that came in earlier is sort of asking around this. And what the survey is telling us is that this is what individual users, employees are currently thinking about. So what does that break down into in terms of where people are feeling it? So 60% are feeling unsafe using public transport at off-peak times. And I think that applies to pretty much all of us. Often that's about traveling alone to and from work, or working in an unfamiliar location. And also, we said that the survey said that 51% think the employers should show some more responsibility, or think about their duty of care to their employees when they're working in these hybrid environments or not working to a standard routine. And although this isn't a statutory legal requirement, it's about what people are expecting now. And I think if we think wider about what we're seeing in the macro environment around employees changing jobs more often. How do we attract the right talent? How do we retain the right talent? This is clear that this is an area that employers, all of us, should be thinking about. We had a specific example come through the survey where we had a care worker who said she was so concerned when going into certain properties that she would park her car as close to the exit door as possible, but not only as close to the exit door as possible, but in the right direction so she would not have to reverse the car in the event of an emergency. These are the things that individuals are thinking about during just the course of going to work. So, are employers, are we underestimating what our employees think about safety? Now, there is a huge gap. 57% of employers underestimate the level of personal safety concerns of employees. A large number have openly admitted to us that they don't know what to do to properly protect their staff. Staff have a good idea of what they want to see, with the 2/3 believing they don't have access to the measures that would make them feel safer. So it's almost what's available, we don't know what's available, we don't know what could be available. So what happens is that means that nothing happens. And so there's more needed to address those concerns. And I go back to the point I made earlier here around job satisfaction. And the study shows that those who experience, so let's say you did have a negative event on your way to work this morning, you would be less satisfied in every aspect of your role. And that affects the way you think about your employer, the brand, about how you will reference that employer in the future. So there's a company brand issue here that we should also be considering. And the study also showed us that 1 in 4 left their job due to a safety concern that happened to them in the last 5 years. Now, that's a long period. So that tells us that it stays long in the memory and doesn't leave you and can still be the thing that pushes someone to leave their place of work. And paying people more is not necessarily the solution to improving safe retention rates. Renewing safety concerns and putting solutions in place, we believe from what we saw from the study, will increase job satisfaction and staff retention. And that's a key point. Okay. So what does that mean? This was really interesting for us because this was about users, employees, individuals doing something different to make themselves feel safer. Now they're changing behaviors. And if you look at these, right, there's, a quarter of people almost change the route they take to work, start traveling with a colleague, think about where they're parking, alerting people to where they are so that if an incident happens, now these are significant things to be doing on your course of work because work is generally a routine and you travel in the same way, you leave at the same time, but 83% of people change their behavior to feel safer. I mean, I was astounded by some of these stats, and it's really, if you think of the sample size that we used and we took them from, it's kind of a real wake-up call, I believe. So, just a case study of a national broadcaster, and the things to draw out here is they looked at this outside of what people would consider high-risk workers. And if they have a set number of engineers who are visiting homes, you would consider those the high-risk workers. But what they did is they looked at a risk profile for every kind of worker that could cover their entire population, their workforce. And they said there's high risk, there's medium risk, and low risk. And they took that categorization approach to identifying and understanding each type of risk. So what did they do? Sorry, this is a little bit unashamedly talking about people safe here, but there is technology that can be applied to each risk situation. And it really is about understanding and consulting with the employers and employees. And if we go back to some of the things we said, is that employees, that they don't know what they have access to. Now, if you have access to a smartphone application or a device, technology, and a connected device, where you could know that you could raise an alarm, where you could get instant access to some help, it makes you feel safer. It can also be a deterrent. and that comes back to that duty of care point, that your employers do really care. So in the world today, cost is paramount, and we know all businesses, and when I spoke to my staff the other day, we said, we're as a business, we're not immune to paying mortgages and having energy bills to pay and all the rest of it. But really, you could look at this differently. And if you're going to roll out some form of solution to this, you could talk about the fact that not needing some man guarding because you have a device which costs less. What's the price of safety for your employees, and how do you put a number on that? And also, you don't necessarily need to send 2 people to every role because that's inefficient, but actually you were doing that for safety concerns. There's another way to address those. So there is actually potentially some cost saving around making this feel safe, but it's that the bit that's not measurable, which is around the satisfaction levels and improved feeling of safety. And that's it from me, Mark.
Fab, thanks so much, Niles. That's really eye-opening. Some of it, I'd seen the report before, and in fact wrote a small news story about it yesterday before the webinar. And I was saying to a colleague yesterday that it perhaps takes the pandemic, doesn't it, for things to become more eye-opening and things to have more of an impact. But some of the stories of people having to park closer to work and changing their route, it's quite extraordinary. So, as you say, it's an awakening, and hopefully we can push on from this. I just wanted to ask, actually, Niles, if I may, and it's just about tech, actually, very briefly. And I'm sorry to throw this at you, but are there some people maybe sort of a little bit wary about adopting tech in terms of their safety program? Are you finding more people are sort of more open to taking tech on board for a strategy?
Yes, and that's really because of how prevalent applications are in smartphones now. So that's one of the ways that they can access this safety. It doesn't have to be a physical device that they carry with them. It can just be an application on the smartphone. And I think that makes it more accessible to people. So I think we are certainly finding people are adopting and are more open to this as a way of accessing it.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you. Thanks again, Niles. We'll hopefully pick up later on with some questions that are coming in from the audience, which is great. So now we're going to move on to our next speaker, and that's the brilliant Nicole Vasquez from Worthwhile Training. And I've worked with Nicole a fair bit in the past, and she's very passionate about what she does and the human side of it. So I'm really looking forward to Nicole's presentation. So good morning to you, Nicole, and the floor is yours.
Morning, Mark. How are you?
I'm good, and nice to see you.
Good, and you. I always worry when people introduce me in a way that is kind of setting me up to fail, but thanks for that anyway.
No.
Okay, so look, let me just tell you a very quick little bit about us. We work in housing, retail, railways, NHS, MOD, football clubs, airports, all over the place with all of these kind of things. And that's what we do, really. So nice to see actually a few of our clients on the call today. So hi, everybody out there. Look, I've been given 10 minutes to talk to you about these 4 subjects. And in my world, that means about 2.5 minutes per kind of area. So I think I better crack straight on. It's all about hybrid workers, looking at how we manage the risks, what are the risks, and what we can do about it. And there are some questions that have come in the Q&A box that I'm going to try and answer during this, or we'll come back to them at the end of it, if that's okay with everybody. So look, I'm not going to talk you through the Health and Safety at Work Act, not in 10 minutes, I promise you. But let's just start with an understanding that these rules still apply. No matter how or where people work, these principles still apply. And it is that underpinning principle that if we've made a decision to do hybrid working, we need to look at what the risks might be. And nobody should be harmed because of the way we've changed the way we're working within the business. And I don't care whether that's come from the pandemic or the lockdown or just a way of working more efficiently or more effectively. It does change the risks for people. So let's kind of take that a little bit further. We've agreed that our responsibilities don't change. Health and safety work legislation, regulations still apply, whatever that kind of at work looks like. And I've got to be honest, 25 years I've been doing this job, and I've worked with hundreds of organisations that have lone workers. And the thing that has come across to me during that time is that when you can't directly supervise people, or when you don't have control over their actions or the environment that they're working in, it changes the risks, but more fundamentally, it changes the way in which we manage the risks. That's the biggest key thing. If I'm not seeing people, speaking to people, standing next to them when they're making binary decisions about whether something is safe to continue or not safe to continue, I have to manage that in a different way. So let's just think for a minute about kind of what has happened over the last couple of years. We were all kind of forced into working in this way. I think most of us. There might have been a few of us that kind of did the day here and there at home, etc. But that whole thing about kind of working from home happened almost overnight. And it was kind of emergency measures for most organisations, including our own organisations. But clearly, this is now different. This is now us in kind of up and running, business as usual. And if you as a business have made that decision that you're going to continue to do this hybrid working, this people working from home as their base, leaving home, going out to see clients, seeing contractors, working with different people in that way, you have to think of how you're going to manage that in a different way. Now, the HSE, and we work quite closely with them over the last couple of years, so it's been quite interesting to hear their views on this. But they did definitely allow for businesses to get away with things and to have those kind of like in the meantime emergency stuff going on. But now they're saying, OK, that was your practice run. Now it's time to put in place proper measures and proper procedures. And so I don't think anymore we'll get away with the kind of, well, this is just the way we do it at the minute. You are showing that this is what you're doing into the future. So in recognition of this, the HSE, and in fact somebody was asking this question about what will the HSE do in the future, they've already produced some new guidance on home working and lone working. In fact, I was part of the group that kind of looked at with the HSE at revising their guidance, which you can see is listed down there at the bottom on protecting lone workers. But they've also brought out more information on home working and generally kind of how you manage lone working. You can call it hybrid working, you can call it location dependent, whatever you want to call it. You know, we are looking at people lone working and people working from home. The other thing that they've really started to address in a much more, I think, specific way is the issue around kind of isolation and stress and well-being and how those two things are clearly linked. They've actually even opened up on their website, and I think this is the first time they've done this for a very specific area, a place where you can report concerns about work-related stress. Now, that doesn't mean if you get one call in from somebody saying, oh, we've got work-related stress at our place, you're going to get a visit from an HSE inspector. But what it may mean is if there is a pattern within your business that these things are starting to build up, that might kind of invoke some kind of investigation or at least a visit. So we know they are taking this seriously, and we need to take this seriously as well. So what are the risks? We've talked about this idea of hybrid working, lone working, etc. I've talked about the fact that there is definitely an emphasis on the work-related stress and mental health and well-being piece, and we're seeing this a lot. In fact, one of our clients recently, I had a phone call from them because they'd got a load of security guys that work in kind of 12-hour shifts and working nights, and they said, we want to do some stuff with them about lone working. And I thought, oh, OK, this is going to be about violence and aggression because they're security, etc. And when I got there, they said, no, it's not about that side of it. They don't see anybody. The problem is they don't see anybody. They go from home. If they are monitoring stuff, they're doing it from home. We don't know what that's like. We've got people who live on their own. They're spending 24 hours a day isolated. And human beings are social creatures. We need to have that interaction. And so I think we need to recognise that when we're talking about lone working, when we're talking about hybrid working, this is one of the biggies. But there are other stuff as well. And don't get me wrong, home working works really well for some. I love it. It means I can get up, stick the washing on, walk the dog when I need to do that. All the kind of things that I can get on with in my daily life and still get my work done. And, you know, my organisation finds it works well for them. However, There are risks, and for others, these will be bigger and some will be smaller. Isolation, we've already talked about. I think there's an issue about kind of lack of support and guidance. And I don't necessarily just mean about the work that people do. I'm also talking about lack of support and guidance for my own personal or my own professional development. How do I pick up things? You'll probably remember this expression, Mark. You learn by sitting next to Nellie. You know, I'll turn to Nellie and ask her what she thinks. And, you know, that kind of idea that when we're in a working environment, we pick up things almost like by osmosis. If I'm isolated from that, how do I develop as a professional? How do I pick up the things that people who've been in the job 10 years know that I don't know already? That can be really, really challenging. And when you combine that with increased responsibility and decision making, that can create huge issues around kind of stress and you know, the pressure for people to do the work. Thinking about that, you know, we work, for example, with social services, and they'll say they have to make really difficult decisions that change people's lives or home circumstances, and they're sat at their dining room table or their kitchen table doing this. I think that also blurs those boundaries, because now I'm bringing work into my home life. And somebody I noticed in the question was asking about kind of vulnerable people and children, you know, if there are other people in the workplace. And I had a really upset social worker on the phone to me saying I had to have a really uncomfortable conversation with somebody that I wouldn't want my best friend to know, let alone my 8-year-old child to kind of hear little bits of it, snippets of it. There's the obvious stuff about longer breaks, longer hours, lack of breaks, all those kind of things. People having deliveries to their home, there's security issues, people see those things being delivered, etc. You know, is that having an impact on me as well? But it's not just at home. You're going from your home to visit contractors, customers, staying away from home, working out in the community, even just popping into the office. And of course, there's that whole argument about, well, is that my normal commute? Well, if my home is now my place of work, going into the office is not my normal commute. That could be seen as a working, you know, a travel for work. So we have to kind of look at that as well. And we should remember the risks and you know, around kind of lone working when we're out and about, whether that's violence and aggression, robbery, all of the stuff that I've spent 25 years helping organisations support their workers for. So what do we have to do? I think if you have now got formal hybrid arrangements, you need to be looking at what the new work-related risks are. I don't mean the risks of somebody making a cup of tea in their house, because they'd be doing that anyway, but the sorts of things that are different because of the work that they're doing. And what are the new assessments that I need to carry out? Do I need to be aware of the lone working side of it? Do I need to do a stress, mental health, isolation, that kind of risk assessment? I definitely need to be doing stuff around workstations and DSEs, and maybe we'll pick that up again later in the questions in terms of time. Slips and trips, only if what you're asking people to do at home changes it. Now, I think the biggest issue for me is I've gone through 2 charges in the last couple of years, and I worked out why that was. I'm constantly wrapping them up and putting them in my bag at the end of the day, rather than them just being left out. So that's having an impact on the electrical equipment, but I'm not sure anybody ever told me I need to be checking on things like that. And of course, then you've got the out and about social risks, road risks that are there anyway, but are they different because somebody is going from home and nobody would know if there's a problem? It's not any longer, if something happens to me on a Friday, nobody would know till Monday. If I go into the office, I'm not sure when anybody would know. So how do we manage it? I'm never going to get this in this time, I'm sorry, Mark. But look, you've got to think about upskilling your managers. This is a new way of managing. You are managing people at a distance. It's virtual management, whatever you want to call it. But you've got to give those people who are managing others the skills to be able to do it, the skills to engage, communicate, listen, the policies and procedures that I know Violet's going to talk about, but also practical training on some of these things. And check in on a regular basis. Be aware of the limitations of doing this in this kind of environment. This is not the same as us sat in a room having a chat. It doesn't matter what anybody says. We have to do this differently. The support needs to be more formal, and you have to make the effort. You have to keep doing it. And the one thing I'm going to leave you with is that being out of sight should not mean that people should be out of mind. They're not safe in their own homes. We don't know what they're doing, and we need to be more aware of it. So look, I'm finished. I didn't do that in 10 minutes. I'm really sorry, but that was as close as I was going to get. We'll pick up questions at the end. So back to you, Mark.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicole, and brilliant presentation. I think we're on track. So there's some good questions that we're going to pick up at the end. I've actually got a couple of questions as well. I can see a lot of questions coming in. So that's really got people thinking on such a really interesting area, and how you can monitor and how you can really look after your staff when you don't see them. So important. But thanks, Nicole. Yeah, we'll come back to you later on in the Q&A.
Cool.
Right, and the final presentation comes from Violet Alvarez, who is from, let's say, the really important Suzy Lamplugh Trust, who are pushing so much, have done so much good work. So I'm really pleased that they're online with us today. And so Violet is the Senior Policy and Campaigns Officer at the Suzy Lamplugh Trust. And Violet, if you're there, I will pass the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, I'm here. So hello, everybody. It's really good to be here today. As Mark said, I work in the Policy and Campaigns team at the Suzy Lamplugh Trust. So I do a little bit of work across personal safety, looking at harassment and online harms, and actually most notably stalking, so sort of lobbying for systemic change across the criminal justice system. So I'm just here to talk to you today a little bit about the personal safety of hybrid workers. Sorry, excuse me, my screen seems to have. So I'm going to start a little bit just speaking about Suzy Lamplugh. So we always start by introducing Suzy when we give any talk, just to give you an understanding of how the trust was set up and why it is that we're here today. So Suzy was an estate agent, and when she was very young, 25 years old, she went out from her office to meet a client from work. And about 6 hours later, her manager realized that she was actually missing. She hadn't come back to the office. She hadn't reported back to him. And so after that, there was a missing persons report that was filed. And she actually disappeared after that, and she has been presumed murdered. So there were really two strains of this that kind of rose from this incident. And one was the sort of stalking element, obviously, because they did believe that she was stalked in the lead up to her murder. But the other aspect was the personal safety side of things. So there was really this kind of understanding that her manager had no idea where she was in those 6 hours, and no policy was put in place. And so that's really the other side of things that we look at when we're working at the trust. So what do we mean by personal safety at work? So what we mean by this is it's not the sort of health and safety aspect of things that Nicole was just speaking about. So it's not so much sort of trips and falls. It's the impact that another person's behavior can have on you while you're at your workplace. We at the Trust have defined this as an individual's ability to go about their daily life free from the threat or fear of psychological, emotional, or physical harm from others. And there was a bit of research done recently looking at those impacts that violence can have on staff members. And, unsurprisingly, we saw high numbers of stress, fatigue, sleeping issues, depression, etc. And although obviously references to incidents of violence are important, we know that it's that kind of insidious, repetitive, aggressive behavior that can also have the same impact. So it's really important to remember that just because something doesn't result in an incident of violence, it doesn't mean it's not impacting that person in a sort of drip effect over time. So some of the impacts of violence and aggression are up here on the screen. So we might see mental ill health, increased dependency on drugs, alcohol, overeating, being confused, etc. And, these are the costs of those who are at the receiving end of the violence. But it's also important to think that for the employer, those losses are things like talent, people leaving their jobs. So that results in gaps in knowledge in the workplace. That might lead to a bad reputation of that organization or company. And that might lead to difficulties recruiting new talent. And, ultimately that employer could actually be sued for not protecting their staff. So it is something that really needs to be taken into consideration by employers. Like Nicole said, I'm not going to go into the details of the legal side of things because I don't want to bore you to bits, but in a nutshell, it's just important to know that employers do have a duty of care towards employees. That's through policies, procedures, training, risk assessments, but it's a two-pronged approach. So employees also do have a responsibility to cooperate with the employer. So they've got a duty of care to themselves, to their colleagues, to their clients, their contractors, and also to members of the public that they might be coming across during their time at work. So that's important to sort of remember. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about harassment and stalking. And this is because these are both personal safety issues that employees do come across pretty often at work, and we're seeing a huge rise in unions actually reporting issues of stalking and harassment. So when we're looking at harassment, what we mean is it's some form of unwanted behavior that is caused by someone else and that causes alarm or distress in the victim. It can extend to fear of violence as well. And it could be a range of different behaviors. So it could be verbal threats, it could be online abuse, we could be looking at property damages and physical sexual assault. We've also got situations that might behaviors that might seem unlikely, things like graffitiing. So in a lot of kind of harassment cases, we'll see, for example, a perpetrator graffitiing something outside the workplace of the victim or outside their home. So the behaviors can be really wide-ranging, basically. And then when we're looking at stalking, it's on the surface really similar, which might seem confusing. So the behaviors can often be the same. However, when we're looking at stalking, it's something that is far more insidious. It's far more impactful in terms of the longevity on the victim. So we define it as a pattern of fixated, obsessive behavior, and that can cause fear of violence or alarm and distress in the victim. And it's really kind of important to think about these two things because we want to emphasize the fact, like I said, that they're personal safety risks. And harassment and stalking, really, they lead to harm. And so that risk is important to manage, it's important to identify, and employers need to know how to tell the difference. It's really, really vital. So we, looking at commuting, we recently did a report entitled Driving Out Violence and Aggression, and we really found some incredibly concerning results from this. So we were looking at what were people's experiences of unwanted behaviors on public transport. And we found that, for example, here, as you can see, 88% of respondents were experiencing some form of unwanted behavior on public transport just in the past 5 years. And that's really concerning because these figures are high despite the hugely reduced footfall on all public transport during the pandemic. So we can imagine that actually these are much higher right now that people are commuting a lot more often. And what I mean by that is things like staring, intimidatingly sitting or standing right by someone, verbal abuse, forcing conversation on someone, physically pressing up against someone. So all of these behaviors, we found they were really common. And the thing that was really concerning was that we found that female respondents were much more likely to experience all the behaviors that we would categorize as public sexual harassment. And they were more likely to experience behaviors such as sexual assault and rape. And men, on the other hand, were more likely to experience those amounting to one-off incidents of physical assault. And so, this is the research in terms of public transport. And what it's doing is it's highlighting the fact that these behaviors are really prevalent. But in terms of the employer, you've got to think as well of that moment where the employee steps off that public transport and goes from, say, the tube to their workplace. So are they being covered during that time? Is that something that they've taken into consideration? There was a particular organisation that we were working with, for example, that had a really good personal safety policy put in place, but they hadn't really thought about the fact that their employees were actually being verbally harassed in that little stretch of time where they were walking through a park, going from the tube to their workplace. So, they had to think about what it is that we can do, to mitigate these risks. And, they had a buddy system put in place. They'd make sure that they take different routes to work if they were on their own, etc. So these are just things that employers sort of need to start thinking about. It's a bit of a grey area, commuting, because the employer doesn't legally have to have a plan in place for protecting their staff. So, they're not technically on shift, so it's not necessarily something they need to cover. The thing is, we come across cases where, for example, lower paid employees working for an investment bank might be targeted or mugged because they're leaving a building, that might suggest that they're high earners. Or we would have a situation where housing property management employees are identified and threatened outside of work, by the clients that they're supporting. So we would advocate that employers should support their employees in this instance, but it is up to the employer. It's also important to note that there is an increased risk to those working in retail, in housing and hospitality, and especially the nighttime economies. So, as an employer, you need to start thinking, are you going to get your night staff cab home? Do they make their own way home at the early hours of the morning, etc.? I also wanted to speak a little bit about online abuse. So we did another report. We come up with a lot of reports, which was about online harassment and cyberstalking specifically. And it was interesting because we wanted to do it during the pandemic to try and work out how is it that the relationship between our online workplace behavior and our personal online behavior might have changed. So we found that because of this dramatic shift to lone working at home, it's led to a really startling increase to cyber abuse in the workplace. And we found that a third of home lone workers surveyed at that time were currently in that moment experiencing some form of online abuse. And again, we're talking about a range of different behaviors. So it could be cyberbullying, message bombing, trolling, hacking, and then things like online sexual harassment, cyber flashing, digitally enabled stalking. Unsurprisingly, the thing about this is the most common platforms where these things were being experienced were things that people, many of us will be using every day at work. So things like email, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, etc. And we found that just over a quarter of these victims were being abused by a current manager or superior. That was followed by colleagues, and then that's followed by sort of other individuals. And really concerningly, over half had no support or guidance from their employer around their personal safety at work. So other sort of employer challenges that we want to look at, it's really key that employers consider the personal safety of their staff on a range of different issues. So it's really important that when they're doing that the personal safety or risk assessment policy marries up with the employee risk profile. And what I mean by that is, we can't have a risk assessment that, for example, was put in place years ago and that's just sitting on the dust and gathering, sitting on the shelf rather and gathering dust. We need to make sure that that employer has gathered the risks of various, staff groups within their company and really assessed that particular current risk. So, for example, is there an individual who's collecting cash, in that company? Is there somebody who works often with people who are likely to be consuming alcohol? Are there people who are doing home visits, So all of these things really kind of need to be taken into consideration. And the other thing to think about is just that harassment and stalking, as I mentioned, are on the rise. So we need to make sure that we're empowering employees and making sure that they have the right sort of information to hand to be able to make the right decisions, and they know how to report the instances and who to report them to. So in terms of what you can do as an employer for that is, first and foremost, we need to make sure that you're identifying the personal safety risks to the employee. So there needs to be a consultation in place with employees from across the organization. And that should consider how personal safety issues and risks have changed since the pandemic. So how the personal safety risk profile of the organization is overall. And in terms of hybrid working, that's something that really needs to be addressed in this consultation to really understand how that has changed for employees. And then once we've got the outcome of the consultation, we would always advocate for a mapping exercise. So that would determine how the risk profile has changed and whether or not any of these existing policies need to be reviewed. And after that, the employer and employee need to work together to just ensure that any new measures introduced are put into practice and kind of, just they're revised constantly, basically. So in a nutshell, it's really a cultural shift that needs to take place from the top all the way down to the bottom. And, the ethos of the trust is really just to make sure that, that every employee gets home safe every day. We all have the right to be safe and to get home from work safely. Just very quickly, sorry, I know I'm going over. We have partnered recently with L'Oreal to put together a bystander training program. And this is really sort of looking at how bystanders, so any member of the public, can stand up against street harassment. There are links in this, in here, and I can send them all to you if you're interested. But, it's free. It's only an hour of your time. And, we really urge that you that you sign up to it if you can. All right. And that's it from me, Mark.
Thanks so much, Violet. We really appreciate it. And sorry to hurry you along as well. It is really such an important organisation, and some of the issues that you're raising there, again, which has come a lot from this webinar, really eye-opening and really just worrying and almost disturbing. And it's something we really need to focus on. So thanks so much. We really appreciate it. So we're coming to the last 10 minutes or so, and it's really good. We've got loads of interaction, loads of questions coming through from all of you. So thanks everyone for submitting your questions. If we don't get, which I don't think we're going to, but if we don't get to answer every single one, then it's something we'll follow up on SHP and work with the speakers on producing just an article answering some of those questions. So the conversation will continue offline if you like. But I wanted to begin actually, and Naz, if you don't mind, can I come to you with the first question? And it's around, has actually come in from Steve Wardle. I'll read it back to you. You've spoken of the increased perception of risk, but not the evidence that there is an increase in risk. Excuse me. Risk involves adversaries, actions, and assets. The people may be the assets, or perhaps their belongings. But who are the adversaries, and what are their actions? Of course, tech is a solution we've touched on, but what truly is the problem? Says Steve. Is
Sure.
that one to throw at you, please, Naz?
Yeah, and I'll refer back to the survey, and what I didn't present necessarily is some of the, apart from the one of the care worker. Essentially what's happening is this is around people and the interaction with people. We've seen a significant increase, I think 90% is the stats in incidents to frontline staff in retail. So that could be physical or verbal threats or an actual physical attack. And that's part of what we're seeing in the course of other workers and employees, whether it's that we talked about that commute into work, commute home from work, it's that feeling of safety from an environment or from other people that could potentially lead to them feeling compromised.
Sure. Absolutely. Thank you, Naz. One of the themes that's coming up in the Q&A a fair bit is, and I'll probably throw this to you, Nicole, if I may, is this idea of boundaries. And I think we're all a bit guilty of it. It's easy, isn't it, to perhaps do half an hour at 5 p.m. when you're at home, or a little bit extra when you're at home, or a couple of hours when you're at home, and before you know it, it's time to go to bed. The commute did used to be that severance, if you like. Yeah. There's a question that's come in, and again, I'll push it to you, Nicole. I'll read it to you. Boundaries is an issue. This questioner is saying, boundaries is an issue I'm having to consider. When people are in the office, I felt I had more power to request the employee to follow recommendations regarding their workstation setup. However, at home, that control disappears, and as such, I can provide as much guidance as support as possible. But a concern that if employees still decide to work from the sofa, but deny this, is occurring. Where does the responsibility lie? They then start to suffer with MSK issues. It's such a good point. What do you think?
It is, and unfortunately we haven't got half an hour to discuss it, but I think the key thing is, as an organisation, have you shown that you've done all that you reasonably can to show that person what a good setup looks like, that they have the ability to have that good setup at home? I mean, that is a real issue that, you know, when we're doing our kind of workstation assessments, we're trusting that somebody's going through the process and saying, yes, I have those things at home. But if they haven't, then maybe they're not suitable to work at home. But I think there also becomes this joint responsibility bit that once you've done all that you reasonably can as an employee, I have to take responsibility for my own safety. And actually, I don't believe, even if you've got people working in the office, that you can control how they sit at their desks and what they do, unless you are literally employing somebody to walk up and down, constantly checking people. It will happen. We found one of the biggest issues is young people working from home. And it's interesting because I'm seeing a physio not related to work at the moment. And she was telling me the other day that they're seeing a massive increase in young people coming in with musculoskeletal issues. And then she says to them, oh, what do you do and where do you work? And they're telling her that they're laying on their beds, working on their laptops, rested up on their knees. And she's, you know, wondering why. I cannot be held responsible for that as an employer, so long as I've put the processes in place, as long as I've gone through and ensured we've had that conversation and I've trained, I've guided, I've given as much help as I possibly can. There has to be a personal responsibility one on that one as well, surely.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. It's so tempting sometimes to go just on the sofa and hunch over the laptop when you need to pick something up.
We've all done it. I mean, we've all done it, haven't we? But it's the difference between that and somebody not having an appropriate place to work at home. You know, if you knowingly that you're letting people work at home, you know, if I'm having a conversation with one of my colleagues and they're sat and I can see their headboard in the background and I don't say anything, then it becomes my responsibility. But if I'm then saying to them, you know, come on, Mark, you need to be sat at a desk really, and this isn't an appropriate place for you to work, then I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. But it's culture. It comes down to that, you know, understanding what the risks are, why they're a risk, and are people trained? And, you know, that's the key thing, isn't it?
Sure, absolutely. Actually, Nicole, just while you're there, one of the points you raised about mental health and well-being, there's a comment from actually someone you might know, Jackie Hobbs, and she says, thanks for messaging, Nicole, said, we've highlighted some real concerns for staff psychological safety and of course personal safety, and you've touched on it a bit. She worries a bit about those employees who are just sort of getting on with it and are sleepwalking to sort of poor well-being and health, and I guess that touches on what you were saying, really, that we just have to take a bit more time about it.
Yeah, I really do. And hi, Jackie. I mean, as Jackie knows, I spend a lot of my time looking at personal safety issues, but when we're looking at hybrid workers, it's both those psychological kind of personal safety issues, but we're also talking about the psychological mental health and well-being. And I think we are sleepwalking into 3 key areas of problems for organisations with hybrid working. One is definitely the musculoskeletal thing that will come to bite us in the backside in a few years' time from people doing exactly what we've just discussed around. I think the mental health and well-being side of it is also huge. The isolation, the stress that will happen without that support and guidance, or without people being able to spot it. And I think the third thing, which is massive for organisations, is they are sleepwalking into disconnected employees. You know, people who don't care as much about the job because they don't connect with the people that they work with, because they don't see them on that human level on a day-to-day basis or a regular basis. I think there are 3 massive issues here going on that are going to come back to bite us, definitely.
Sure, brilliant. Thanks, Nicole. We're annoyingly coming to the end. We could go on for a lot more with all these questions and some of the topics that are coming up. But I actually just wanted to pivot back to that poll we had at the beginning, if you can remember, nearly an hour ago. And I'd like to just bring up again, and I go to you, Naz, if I can, just around technology, really. And I wonder what do firms need? It's a broad question, so apologies, but what do firms really need to consider when adopting new technology in this instance?
Yeah, sure. So if it's specific to providing some form of lone worker protection or employee protection or safety, I think the main thing to consider is this is about the safety of employees. So that's hugely important, nothing more important, arguably. Therefore, you need to go with a partner that's trustworthy, accredited, and has that longevity and heritage in the industry that they understand what it means to protect people. I think that's the first thing. I think the second sort of point I'd just make on this is that technology really is an efficient way to handle some of these issues, because you can't do it. And I think I was reading a question about, is checking in on staff, phoning them all the time, is that enough? There are other ways to check on an employee's well-being, and that could be potentially with a how are you feeling type thing, and sometimes just the importance of that question. And you can do that remotely, you can do that without human interaction as well. So there's a number of ways to consider technology, but in terms of a partner, absolutely, you're entrusting the safety of people, so make sure that's foremost in your mind.
Sure. Actually, Naz, on that, I guess in technology is great in so many aspects of life and society, and we're pretty much doing this remotely on a webinar in different parts of the country. But I guess with safety, it's a lot of the conversations I'm having now is getting that balance between using the technology but also that human element, because there is still that you have to have it. It's pretty important. And I wonder, again, I'm giving you such philosophical questions, but is that something that can be ingrained, and that's something that comes in the training, I guess, when you're pushing products, when you're the products like this?
Exactly. And Nicole's touched on it eloquently, that you can't beat the human interaction, and being conscious of people working perhaps for days and they've not, they're on their own, they've not seen anyone. People live alone, right? So I think getting a cadence into your business that says certain meetings are face-to-face, and there's a good reason for that, and it helps and balances their work-life requirements as well. But we always, when we're talking to companies about this, stress the importance of human interaction. Sure.
Violet, I've got a very quick question. I've got 2 minutes on the countdown at the top here, but if you can, I just want to ask: do you see people in terms of stalking, in terms of violence, or the psychological or the online? Are people more willing to come forward now? Are people more braver? Have you seen more of a response in that way recently?
It's a difficult question, isn't it? Because all we can do is rely on the stats that we've got from records from police. So there are a number of reasons why people might be likely to report those issues. Some, might be reporting it through the employer, some through, emergency services. I think generally speaking, it's just down to a raising of awareness of what those crimes are. So the more the public actually understands what is harassment, what is stalking, what does it what do those behaviours look like, and who do I speak to? That's kind of the most important thing. So we have seen a rise in those things being reported, namely harassment and stalking, as mentioned.
Great.
And I think that's it's really wonderful to hear, and we're really pleased about that. But we are concerned that that potentially actually means that those numbers are just rising altogether. So yeah, you've got to kind of balance that out, I guess.
Thank you. Sorry to hurry you. That's great. And if I can, in the last 30 seconds, I'd really like to just thanks Nicole, Violet, and Naz as well. It's been a really fascinating conversation. I hope you in the audience has found it intriguing as well. So last bits of housekeeping. Just like to thank PeopleSafe for sponsoring, and we'll be sending you out your personalised email with attendance certificate shortly. And that's it from me. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark.
Thanks, guys. Sorry.